Greetings and salutations, fellow DMs and D&D players. I'm Russell Kirkby from Sidario. And I want to talk to you today about improvisation. Basically, how to regulate your game, how to regulate the pace and story and flow of your D&D session. Because it seems to me that we do a lot of preparation as DMs. And we use a lot of resources as DMs. We pull from books and D&D Beyond and internet web pages and all of this stuff. And we have stat blocks and maps and all of this preparation. And it's really, really useful. And if you don't have that stuff, it can be hard to run a session, you know. But sometimes, every now and again, you find yourself in a situation where you don't have all that preparation ready and you've got a game session and it's starting in 15 minutes and you're like freaking out because you've got to run a session and it's right in front of you and oh my God, what are you going to do? So, you know, there's a couple of ways you can go about this. I think the first most important thing when you're running a campaign, when you're running a D&D game of any sort, any kind of role-playing game, actually, what's the most important thing to me is to know the characters in your setting, the NPCs, understanding who the NPCs are, what they're about, what are their motivations, how do they relate to each other, what do they want? Knowing what your NPCs want is a huge step in knowing what to do. It's also good to have a theme. If you've got a theme going, like, for example, a theme might be an examination of a central question, which might be something like, what is mercy? You know, or something, you know, more solid, like, I don't know, greed or something. That's a theme, you know, whatever. But it could be more philosophical. I mean, I encourage you to do something that's a little bit more interesting than something like that. Or how many monsters can I kill this session? So anyway, in terms of regulating the pace and story, I want to give you a couple of little tips. These are just things that I do. I don't expect this is going to work for everyone. Probably won't, especially if you're like the kind of DM that runs games and you want them to be really realistic and more like a simulation, in which case, this stuff might not work for you at all. But I'm going to tell you what I do anyway. And in order to keep my combats running smoothly, what I will do personally is I will not have set hit points for my monsters. I'm going to call them mobs. If I say mob, I mean monster. Mob being a mobile. This is an old term that somehow crossed into RPG games online, like Neverwinter and World of Warcraft and so on and so forth. So anyway, when I'm talking about mobs, I'm talking about monsters. So what you can do is you can regulate the pace and story of your fight scenes, particularly, by not writing down the hit points of your monsters. This sounds like a completely stupid idea, and you know, maybe it is. But if you don't write down the mob's hit points, instead what you do is you track how much damage each player is doing to each mob. And then when you get to a point where you're actually happy with that, then you can just say that they're dead. You know, you can actually choose when they die based on how the game is going. Like this way you can regulate how long do you want the fight to last. The question of knowing how long do you want a fight to last has a lot to do with how much preparation have you done? How far through the story are they? Is there 5 minutes left of the session? Do you have like 2 hours in front of you and you don't know what to do with it? So you need to buy yourself some time to dream up the next scene. Do you need to wrinkle out some details? Do you want this to be a big epic fight? Do you want the players to feel like they've really battled something and they've overcome obstacles? Or is this a fight that's more about like they're sneaking through tunnels and they need to get somewhere? In which case you might be able to just kill off the NPCs, let the mobs die a little bit more easily. You know, you don't necessarily need to have big, long, drawn-out fights where everybody rolls a million dice and, oh my God, it turns into a mechanical nightmare. It's not necessary. It really isn't. The thing that you probably need to remember is that there is no D&D police, and they're not going to come and knock on your door, and Matt Mercer is not going to come swinging through your window on a bungee cord and point his magic dice. No, wait, what would Matt Mercer use? Probably some kind of a wand. I don't know. But anyway, so nobody's going to come and arrest you and take you away for being a bad DM because you didn't follow the rules, okay? What you can do to regulate your game, to regulate your combats, you can adjust the hit points of the mobs on the fly. In fact, I suggest that's the strongest thing you can do. Besides that, you can fudge dice behind a screen if you need to. so that sometimes the mobs make mistakes, and they do, and they should make mistakes. I had a game the night before last where I had characters jumping from, or NPCs jumping from barges to other barges and onto platforms and things like that, and they had to make dexterity checks because they're creatures and they're alive and they have to get from point A to point B. And if the players can fall in the sewer, in the poo, so can the mobs. You know, so that's an interesting way of keeping it fresh as well. Fresh, irony. So yeah, mobs make mistakes and they fail checks. You can adjust their hit points. You can fudge your rolls. You can also do things like, for example, say you've got a spellcaster in the party of mobs, and you're suddenly realizing that actually this mob is too powerful, and I'm probably going to kill my players if I'm not careful. Now, killing the players is an entirely different and separate issue to this, and that's the ethics of that come into it. There's all sorts of reasons why you may or may not want to kill player characters. In any case, usually you don't want to kill player characters, especially if you've prepared a big game and you've written a 2-year-long campaign and you're spent money on books. Killing player characters seems a little bit counterintuitive and counterproductive to running a good story. Having the spellcaster having already spent his spell slots on something else, maybe some minor incursion during the day, or any number of other things. Could have been scrying, could have had to beat up his lieutenant because his lieutenant was being insubordinate, or any number of things. So these are a few ideas about what you can do to manage the pace of your game. People talk about initiative too. This is another thing. I don't always use initiative, and Matt Mercer has not turned up to my house to smack me on the wrist over it, okay? This is not a thing. There are no D&D police. You can, in fact, improvise an entire game without writing down a single thing beforehand, and the players might not even know the difference, because if you told a good story, you did your job, and that's actually the only thing that matters. So keep that in mind when you're DMing, because it's not that you shouldn't plan, okay? I'm definitely not saying that you shouldn't plan and that you shouldn't write things down. If you've got time to, and you're prepared to, and you've got the energy and the motivations to do it, awesome. In fact, I think you should. I really do think you should. It is that much easier to use your creativity to adapt something that you've planned and make it dynamic and flexible in the moment, on the fly, for your players as they are, and adjust things as you go. It's far easier to do that than it is to make everything up from scratch on the fly. You're basically having to put all of your creative energy into making up the entire world as you go along. Much easier to just improvise a plan. So, and then you get subtlety, you get variation, you get actually a much more interesting game, and you are able to use your creativity to take the whole game to a whole new level instead of barely scraping past at a passable level. Because if you improvise your game entirely from scratch, you'll be lucky if it's passable, okay? And you can do it. It may even be excellent, but you'll be lucky if it's passable, and you'll be very lucky, and you'll be a master if you can make it excellent. So yeah, those are my main points here. Just to go back through them, the most important thing here, I think personally, is that you can improvise hit points for enemies. They don't have to be static. And one last thing is also, with initiative, you can. I find that with initiative, if there's like one player or one character in the party who's attacked, the whole party doesn't need to roll initiative just yet. The other players might decide to stay back. They might not want to get involved in this fight. What happens when they too choose to get involved? That's when they roll initiative, and that's when they step into the initiative sequence. If the combat's going to be a short, snappy thing, and they're just basically going to lay waste to one or two NPCs, one or two mobs, what's the point? Why would you even slow the game down with initiative? There is nothing exciting about watching people rolling dice, honestly. There's nothing exciting about that, especially if they take forever to do it. And if you're doing it online, if you're using D&D Beyond or something, which is an awesome tool, by the way, I recommend D&D Beyond, but it has a tendency to lag. It has a tendency to be a slow process, especially if you're doing it in a sort of scenario where you share your screen, roll your dice, go back to the main screen. The next person shares their screen, rolls their dice, and then there's the lag factor. That can take forever. So if you don't need to roll dice, why would you? My general overall philosophy to running games and game mechanics is that use as few mechanics as you need to. You only add mechanics when the players expect you to, or if you need them to moderate something to make it feel fair. And I say feel fair because at the end of the day, it's a story and it's not fair. It's not ever going to be fair. It's all about you releasing certain amounts of tension during the game as you go. That's what that's what it is. That's the story. You're the storyteller. Regulate the story. That's your job. Okay, you're not here to run a simulation, in my opinion. If you wanted to be in a simulation, you could go and play World of Warcraft or any number of online role-playing games. If you're simply there to kill stuff and be in a simulation, play a video game. The potential of a tabletop role-playing game is bound up in the fact that it is real people playing with each other using their imaginations. And if you have good imaginations and you actually think about stuff, the limits to what you can do are not going to be bounded by a few rules and mechanics in a book. I mean, this is not a board game. You're not playing checkers. Nobody's winning. Nobody's losing. So why be bound up with the rules? The mechanics are useful tools. That's it. Stop worrying about it.